DJ John, and I'm here in this part of our artist feature show with the accomplished guitarist Roy Montgomery, all the way from New Zealand. So, Roy has been in many groups and in collaboration since the 1980s, and he's a personal favorite. Personally, he's a favorite musician of mine. So, first off, I'd like to say thank you for joining and being able to interview us here at KMNR, and especially with the 18-hour time zone change between the two of us. So,
you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, it's no problem at all. First, I was going to ask you. First, I was going to ask you. Would you want to give us a little bit of background about yourself to just to introduce the audience to who you are and things like that?
Okay, so I live in New Zealand. I live in Christchurch, New Zealand, and I have done for much of my life. I was actually born in England, in London, and lived in Germany for the first 3 or 4 years of my life, and then emigrated with my family to New Zealand. So I guess I regard myself as an acclimatized migrant. I feel like a New Zealander most of the time, but then sometimes I feel a little bit different. And I don't know whether that's influenced the way I've headed towards music, because by and large, when I grew up, the culture in New Zealand was very, I think, similar to North America in some ways. We're a pretty pragmatic nation by and large. We like to, doing is important, sometimes more than thinking. So intellectual things or the arts sometimes gets a backseat to actually, being seen to be doing something like cultivating the land or building things or having some sort of impact on the world. And I think that made it tricky for me to work out where I fitted in musically, because I liked music very much as a child, but I didn't want to play violin or piano or follow classical music, and there didn't seem to be much leeway. You either did that or you just absorbed pop culture without being able to do much about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I found my way into making music, was very much just learning by doing.
Okay.
And I'm still like that, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're self-taught with your as a guitarist, which I have much respect for. The only music learning I had was learning the bell chimes in elementary school for the Christmas pageant. So I had 2 things to do that. So it's very commendable and it's very respectable to be able
to. I learned the glockenspiel for school shows.
Cool. I guess so you started out, I guess you've kind of did it, as you said, as by doing, and you joined. I guess you kind of meandered with different groups earlier in your teenage years with, I guess, in my notes, you said, it says like with the psychedelics in like the 70s. And then I think you went to some other bands as well. But the one band that a lot of people like to talk about with you is the Pin Group in the early 80s in New Zealand. And then afterwards, you kind of went on recess and kind of took a break for a while. And then you came back to New Zealand to do Dadama. And those are the 2 artists we just heard that we heard Ambivalence and Papa Doc from. So I guess one of my first questions is that we're going to start going to your solo career, and to me, your solo career, your music as a musician has a very distinct like fingerprint as a sound. But I'm kind of curious, how would you, for someone who never heard your music before, how would you describe your music to them?
Ooh.
I'm not trying to trick you or anything.
So. No, I know you're not. I know. and I don't, I don't take those questions lightly. I suppose to cover the range of things that you just talked about, if you think of what I do as a guitar-based pattern or riff or sequence or something like that, that's all I ever brought to band music, and not in a kind of stock standard way of thinking about how to write a 3-minute song with verses and choruses and just providing the guitar version of that, but finding patterns or rhythms that I like independently of whether they're played amongst other musicians or on my own, and I think that that's been the constant through the bands that you've mentioned. It's not that I can't join in with something that exists already, and I did that with both the Pin Group and Dada Ma. We took turns with pieces of existing music sometimes, but I tend to go for a musical motif or a pattern and build things up from there. And the difference between being in a band and doing my solo work is that I'm limited enough in my guitar technique as it is. I can't really go, and then I'm not a multi-instrumentalist that can then go and do drum tracks and bass tracks and keyboard tracks to make a song as you would hear it in a band or in some sort of ensemble. So all I do is layer guitars basically. So that's my modus operandi, if it makes any sense.
Yeah. With your and I guess I don't know if we're getting a little bit of audio issues, but because you it seems with a lot of your work, especially your earlier a lot of your early solo work, you worked with your Tiesto guitar and your 4-track, and you've mentioned earlier in other interviews and things like that about kind of building up to something, and once it kind of worked out, I guess maybe not worked out in the sense, but once it kind of got to that sound that you liked, and then you kind of build onto that either on certain motifs or themes, because that's something as well. You see that with a lot of your albums, like Temple 4 especially, where there is kind of like these motifs that kind of build throughout the whole album, and it's different.
I think maybe the difference is that I fall somewhere between a kind of garage band, indie, don't rehearse too much, don't polish it aesthetic, and having an ear that is a bit more tuned to things fitting together. So it's not improv, and it's not just making a noise and seeing, what comes out on the top of that. So that's where I'd be different from, say, Sonic Youth.
Okay.
In the way that collapsing a lot of guitars together produces something else. So I tend to still see them in separate, and I record them separately and slowly bring them together rather than crash them all together. And I think the use of the 4-track for me was a way of guaranteeing that I could do that, so that I could multi-track. But it also meant that it was called 4-track for a reason. It wasn't a bounce down or sound on sound recording machine. It was 4 tracks for a reason, because that's normally what it takes to make a demo. You have the bass, your drum track, and you add a few things in. And I found that very useful, because although you could bounce down, I knew you lost some sound quality if you started bouncing tracks. So for me, getting as much as I could out of each of those 4 channels was a very good discipline for me. And that's why I think I might have over-labored it on some of my liner notes, saying I'm playing a shitty guitar on a shitty recording device, and getting a bit more out of it than you might normally expect, there's your, there's the lesson in that you can get quite a lot out of a little if you've got some good ideas or if you're really inspired to do something. And I think, although I'm now to jump ahead to one of the questions that you had about, do I still use that setup or that, all those bits of equipment? I've graduated to an 8-track, but that's pretty much my limit. So all I've done is double the inputs.
Okay.
And I don't go beyond that. So I'm still in that world of thinking that there's lots of great technology. You can do things on your laptop, you can sample things, but I really need to hear a thing in my head, try and get it down on not on tape anymore, but record it, and then think very carefully about what I add to it. And sometimes I find myself working with the 8-track, only doing 5 tracks because 5 is enough.
Yeah.
I don't need to go to 8. So I found a space that kind of works for me, but you only know what you know when you don't know what you don't know. If I had a bigger setup, or I work with other people who were used to different types of technology, then I might have stopped using the 4-track and the 8-track long ago. It's just one of those things.
Okay. I guess going back to because that's especially with someone who's, I guess, a technical, I guess, with all the technology and stuff, reading the things about how you would make your music was I learned a lot, because there's a lot, and I think for some people they don't understand how the music is made, and it's sometimes just is like, something might sound, it would be like, oh, it's just waves of noise or whatever, for someone who's not, who hasn't experienced these things and stuff like that. So I think explaining that is very helpful for people to understand that. I'm going to play a little bit of show and tell. Our first track we're going to be playing for the show it's going to be, I guess, from your solo career, would be from your first solo album, Scenes from the South Island. So here it is.
Oh, you got a vinyl version.
Yeah, I got obviously I wasn't old enough to get it at the time, but I ordered it off of the Discogs, and it's really nice. It has all the acknowledgments in there and everything. I like Jessica is her name. Jessica
Maya.
Yeah, I really love the album art for that. And so, do you have an idea where that was taken, or
I know exactly where that's taken. Yeah.
Okay.
She and her husband Bill were on a driving tour of the South Island, and they pretty smart cookies, so they knew enough to go to the well-known scenic spots, but also to go a little bit out of the way. And this particular scene is on the Otago, so it's heading way south on the Otago coast. That people often don't hug the coast enough to take all this in. They go inland because it's quicker. But there's an area called the Catlins, which is a mixture of old native forest and farmland, and there's a whole lot of these dead trees that have been burned and weathered, that have survived. So that tall structure, the sculpture that you see, is a dead tree, and I photographed the same tree years before Jessica did. It's one of those things that if you've got a certain eye for things. So I said to her when I saw it, I said, I know that tree. And that made it pretty obvious that it should be the cover of the album. Just while I'm on that, there's a pretty good chance that the album will be re-released on vinyl sometime this year with some new tracks.
Well, that's really cool. Because I guess not to get too much into that right now, but it seems like it seems like there was rumors or about this is that the Datama is This Is a Dream will be re-released as well, and it seems like you are also working on new content and some new work as well. So I guess things don't stop. Things don't stop, even though you're doing all your things, as well as being a university lecturer and a volunteer firefighter, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and it's worth remembering that I have a day job, and I have, most people don't know me as a musician here in this country. If they know me at all, it's through my work and through my job. So yeah, it's another thing to remember, that you can only put into it what you can. I give as much time as I can to music, but I'm not a full timer. I'm a part timer.
Okay.
And so things like reissues and new material, I don't manage those in a career sense. Sometimes there are long gaps in between things, and sometimes it seems like, I'm putting out an album a month and then 2 reissues at the same time, which is from a marketing and agent point of view is not a, if I had any of those things, they would be saying this is not the way to run your career.
Well,
you fool.
Okay. Well, because it's interesting, because I would because that was one of my questions I sent to you, is if people would or if, since you were I was kind of homing in on the university part, as if any students came up to you or anything like that, if saying, oh, I've listened to so and so, I listened to so and so album or anything like that. Do you find that as a thing that you like, having that I wouldn't say secrecy, but having that having that split between, I guess, your full-time job and then your full-time and your part-time? Or would you, I guess, is that something that surprises you?
It doesn't surprise me because of the way things just panned out with releasing music. It's not that I was never, I mean, I was right behind Flying Nun as an idea, like the New Zealand indie music scene. So it's not as if I was a snob or turned my back on the local scene and the local labels deliberately. It's just the way things went. When we first started out with the Pin Group, we wanted to, because we'd read the backs of indie records from the UK. Like, I remember Scritti Politti, the first single from them, and the Desperate Bicycles. They told you how much it cost to press labels, print labels, press records, do sleeves, and it was so cheap that, and there was none of the hype or hassle associated with record labels and the business. And I think that kind of stuck in such a way that I wanted to do my own thing, or do it with people, but retain as much control over things. So it meant never signing deals, never signing to labels, and just doing it as you could. And I think I've benefited from saying that belongs over there, and to pay my rent and to pay my bills, I'll get a different job.
Okay.
And having some of that separation, I think, is quite good. It keeps you in your place, I think.
Okay. So going on, I guess, with the playlist, because that's all very interesting. And because I read some of the things where I guess you worked at an EMI record store at some point, and things like that.
I did my high fidelity turn.
Cool.
Yep. That's exactly how it was. When you're 20 and working in a record shop, you are as arrogant as hell.
Yeah. I guess there's a lot of things. I guess things like that don't change for how people can be like that.
But I think one of the things that has occurred to me, I've talked to other people as they've got older as well. You can write those things off either as a rite of passage, as someone who goes in and buys records in a record shop and say, well, that's what you did then, and everybody did it. Or if you work there, that's what you did because you couldn't get a job anywhere else, and they don't really have any intrinsic value. But I think for quite a few of my peers, since we didn't regard the formal education system at that time, and we didn't know where we were going with work prospects, there were downturns in the economy, things were starting to change in terms of where jobs for life no longer existed and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I think it was like a de facto college, so I went to record shops and got advice about music, but I also got advice about life from some of these people. And, it might not have been the best advice in some cases, but it was the only game in town in terms of intellectual ideas and discussing art and culture. And so they were like lighthouses, those places. And I think that kind of still sticks, that aspect of it. It's not just about pop culture, it's about enculturation processes and, knowing who your friends are and sorting through things in the absence of real schooling beyond your high school years.
Okay. Yeah. Not to get too sidetracked, but for 2 of my high school jobs, I worked at some of the local state parks near I lived. So that was a lot of talking to people who probably would never talk to in the first place, doing a lot of yard work and things like that. But it's kind of cool that there's value in those kinds of things, like someone who might not have known otherwise. But but anyways, this is really exciting. But so during your solo period, you were recording I would say a majority. You're doing, I would say, playing and recording majority of your stuff in New York. I forget the apartment address. I know it's on one of your compilations. But
324 East 13th Street.
Yeah.
I saw a link.
Yeah.
Recently, because that was a pretty rundown apartment building, and I think I was paying about $50 a week.
Wow.
And they now go for $2,500 per month, which is insane.
That sounds crazy. Like, because Missouri, in Rolla, Missouri, not to get too sidetracked, in terms of how, because it's relatively rural, even though we have like a university here, and so and I wouldn't say Rolla doesn't have like, Missouri's kind of interesting where it has like its universities kind of split up, where we're kind of like a state school. I don't know if they have that in New Zealand, but basically there's like the main campus, which is in Columbia, and that has like, I don't know the exact population. My younger brother went there, but I went to the engineering school. And so Raleigh is kind of rural. And so I think without the students, it's like, I think 10,000 people here at most. Right. But I think it's maybe 15 or 20. The students make up more than I think half of the population or something like that. It's kind of crazy. So the nice thing is that although there's definitely some places here that I'm glad I didn't live at, the price, a lot of the places are the rent's relatively cheap, but it's not, especially if you have plenty of roommates and stuff like that. But after Escape Velocity, and this is for Temple 4, this is my first, this was the first record, I guess, album that I listened from your discography. And I guess for the listeners out there, and I'll even though you can't see, I'll just show the cover. So it's named after the Mayan temple, the pyramid temple in, if I remember correctly, Guatemala. And it's it's amazing. This is definitely up there with my favorites. Um, and so the song that I chose to play on the playlist was Jaguar Meets Snake. That's kind of, I would say it's kind of like the apex of it, and it just kind of, it starts kind of slow, but then it kind of builds up, and it with with the layers of the with the 4-track and all that stuff. It's really amazing how much you can do with just the guitar. Um, but what I find it's interesting about the album, because there's been several other, and what I kind of want to ask you about is with the album, it kind of, there's kind of a mystique surrounding the music itself with some of the themes and things like that. But I think the actual some of the stories that people talk about and what people say online about the album, about apparently, I mean, obviously you had to visit the temple, the pyramid, to but some people have said things like you visited the pyramid, you slept on the side of the pyramid, maybe you, after convincing a guard, you slept there, or you bribed him to sleep there overnight. I was just kind of curious about how much of that is true, and I guess what was the experience kind of writing, I mean, kind of producing something that honestly I don't think anything like this has been produced, either in terms of content or in terms of subject.
Well, the first part of the question, yeah, that's true, and it's not so much my own initiative. Like when you go to these places, unless you're already traveling with someone or you're traveling in a group, you tend to have to follow, the opportunities like timing, or if you're staying in hostels, you get these moments where someone says, "Oh, I'm going to do this. Who's going today?" And I ended up with 2 or 3 other people, and the game at the time was to try and stay overnight in the park, in various parts of the because it's a national park, and it's like well looked after, but it does have these wild animals around. So at the end of the day, everybody's meant to leave. But of course, some of the best sounds and the best atmosphere are like at dawn and dusk, and you're not going to get those if you are, working like normal operating hours, because that's when everybody's asleep or away, or the guards are not there. So, or the staff, most of the staff aren't there, so they can't run the place. So they want everybody out. But annoying tourists and seekers of various things decide that nothing would be better than to, as long as it's not freezing cold, sit out all night, either talking or just thinking, sitting quietly with all this history around you, and forest, and the sounds of the jungle, which a lot of us don't get. Where we live is nothing like that. And so, yeah, the upshot of it was there were about 3 of us, and we camped out in various places to report back to each other on what it was like.
Yeah.
What's it like sleeping in a damp hollow, or on top of a temple? Not very comfortable is the answer. But you do it because it's worth doing.
Did you? Oh, I was about to say, did you like take, so because like with the kind of like that atmosphere and kind of staying, did you kind of take any notes about how things, kind of like anything you heard? Did you hear any wild animals, anything like that, or was how did you try? How did you make sure, or maybe how did you try to take that experience and put it into an album like Temple 4?
Probably the easiest answer is that I didn't do any field recordings or uh, any kind of transcriptions, like anything literal. I just let I'll start again. One of the reasons for going there was it was a personal challenge to go that far away and think about something, you know, and that could have been somewhere else. I mean, it was, you know, I read up and I thought this would be a great place to aim for, and not easy to get to. It was quite hard to get to, but I could have found somewhere else to do that. So I wasn't in advance convinced that I had to go there to make an album or to go and get material for an album or, you know, try and listen to things so that I could then turn them into wild sounds into guitar sounds or anything like that. It was more about getting there and you know, sitting still for a little while. And if that's all it was, like just a sort of moment for your spirit, that would have been enough. I didn't know I was going to produce an album out of it. Is the short answer.
Okay.
And the use of the imagery and the names and the animals was much more a combination of things I'd seen in, you know, like the iconography of the Mayan culture and the symbols of Mayan culture, so the jaguar and the snake symbolically, and I just robbed those cultural references in a way that I hoped wouldn't be seen as, you know, just tourism of it.
Yeah.
Tourism.
Yeah.
It seemed to be that the music that I wrote was about coming to terms with something that had happened, and this was a way these things then attach themselves to that music rather than having kind of some images of a place and wanting to make sounds about it. That makes sense.
Yeah. And yeah, that makes perfect sense and I guess it kind of felt, I guess to you it felt right to make something like that. And I didn't mean to frame it in a way that like, oh, it's going to be so cool, I'm going to go down and sleep overnight. But
no, I didn't take it like that. But
okay.
I think the fact that that scenes from the South Island and Temple 4 were recorded simultaneously in the same apartment tells you something about the difference. You know what I mean? That there were things that fitted my memory and my strong familiarity with where I'd come from, and there were things that came out of me that didn't belong so much to going, you know, reliving a place. It was more going somewhere new, and I think Temple 4 was more of a new place, not necessarily one I would have chosen because it was a lot more emotional. But I think that's how they separated out. Is that it was the emotions that drove the narrative or the pulling things together. So Temple 4 was much more, reflection rather than just memory.
Okay. And I guess that kind of leads to, has there been something where, and I guess that might be one of the examples where have you maybe composed something, or maybe because when I first correspond to you, it was about the same time that Mark Hollis of Talk Talk, he passed away, and he was kind of known for being very kind of he was very kind of trying to think of the word. He had stuff in with, especially with his self-titled, where he said I could never perform it live. It was just so emotional. Um and it kind of just it wasn't meant to be like that. Um have you kind of because I don't think anyone is expecting a world tour from you anytime soon. and you've said in the past about things about performing live. Um, and I was kind of curious how is it kind of like something like that being so personal where you're kind of working alone, you are recording on this 4 track, or as you progress through your other instruments, as you kind of, is that kind of been anything? I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling.
No, I get what you're saying. I think there is some differences between Mark Hollis and myself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he went through things backwards, didn't he? Really, like instead of starting obscure and unresourced, he kind of found himself in a bit like Scott Walker, dumped in the middle of the business. And the next thing you know, someone's doing your hair and pushing you out on stage, and you can do it. And it's easy in the sense that they're saying, just write can you write pop songs? And you go, yeah, I can write pop songs. And then deciding that that's not what that's a little bit of you, and that might be some of your influences. But the reason you're doing the music is that you're trying to find something that isn't there yet. And I think, so he found his way through all of the hype and the production and the bigness of the business in the same way that Scott Walker did, and stripped it down. And when you start stripping those things down and working to record something where, you wait for a moment when you get just the right sound, and you know that you'll never be able to repeat that again, it makes the idea of playing live it's doesn't make sense anymore, because you are contradicting the process that you just committed yourself to, which is to work in isolation until you get something as right as you think it's going to be, and your chances of doing that again pretty much nil. So doing a copy of it, copying it, is inauthentic to yourself and to everybody else. And even if it might sound as though you can carry it off, your heart won't be in it. And I think that's where we have something in common, because once I've done something, that's it. I've done it, and I find it very odd and almost an insult to everybody to spend another bit of time going back over what I've just done when I should be working on something else. And I think, and if I haven't got anything else to work on, and I think this was Mark Hollis's point, is like, if you've done something you're happy with and you're not immediately driven to do something else, then don't do anything at all. Just wait until you want to do something again. And if that never happens and you're happy with what you did, who's losing? The only people that are losing are those that have got something invested in the product, or or multiplying it, or copying it and reproducing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I can see exactly, what he was, his outlook and his attitude, I think, were pretty admirable, considering that the inducements to compromise were so clearly put to him early on. And he, like I said, he went backwards through it. He didn't start out with integrity and then squander it. He traded some things away at the start, and then I found his way back, and I think Walker did that as well.
Okay.
I'm not comparing myself in any way to their talent, but I can see exactly where they saw it.
Well,
what Music Man.
Yeah. Um, so one of the I guess, and I guess that's one of the things I like about your music, especially where you have this very, I guess, trying to think of the where you produced a lot during your solo career, where you released a lot of 7 inches and things like that. But unlike where someone would think, oh, he has this 4 track, he's just, he's recording all these songs by yourself. You did do a lot of collaborations too, and I think it's a very interesting thing where you collaborated with I mean, you've worked with, I guess, which you collaborate with like Flying Saucer Attack, Bardo Pond to do Hash Jar Tempo, um, Kirk Lake. That's one that that's I guess that's a more obscure one, but Liz Harris as well. I find that that's very interesting where you kind of where you do these things where you have a solo you've kind of had the solo work and you still do because with your releases of our RMHQ and things like that, but you also you have a really rich history of collaborating with others. um, so I guess my question with that is, um, you've because you kind of started out working with these groups and then you kind of have the solo period. Whenever you kind of collaborate with these other peoples, with the other groups or the um the other artists, did you kind of go back to how you did you kind of take those roles that you originally had, or did you kind of move on to other kind of roles with collaborating with someone, or did it kind of change depending on the person?
Yeah, I think the context probably had a lot to do with it. So, in terms of how did I feel, say, when collaborating with Bardo Pond, who I was told by third parties, oh, you really need to go and play with these guys, even before I'd heard any of their music. And I think one of the things I've learned is to take advice from people I trust. So if someone says, it'd be really cool if you did jammed with them, and I'm not a great person for just jamming for the sake of it. But if someone says, who I respect, says that, then and the opportunity arises, then I would do that. And working with them reminded me of working in Dadama. It was like, okay, they've got, they can start something up themselves. I'll just wait for a few minutes and see where I fit in.
Mhm.
And there's something important for me to do that,
Yeah.
because I know that I don't rely on that for making music. I don't have to wait for someone to start something. I can start things myself. But you'll get something different out of me from that kind of collaboration. I'll be trying to, yeah, get a little bit further out of my comfort zone than I might normally do, where I'm thinking, okay, I've got to come up with a motif here, and then I've got to build things around it, and maybe someone can add something to that.
Hmm.
I think when you've got a formidable group of people already working together, where there's 4 or 5 of them or a few of them, then it's a good discipline to try and work your way into that. And I don't have any major chops that I can drop on.
Yeah.
I can't do solos in there, so it's not like I can say, "Hey, everybody, stand back! I'm about to unleash some blazing guitar run."
Yeah.
It's never going to be like that. But I find what's happening now interesting, because years ago I wouldn't have had the confidence to send someone a music file, and in some cases never have met them or shook their hand or anything, and say, hey, what do you think you can add to this? Or I've got someone's recommended that I work with you. We're never going to be in the same room, but I've listened to your work, and I've got something that I think you might be able to work with. Here's a musical pattern, and here's some words. See what you make of it. And that's quite an interesting new experience for me. I've never really worked like that, where you're handing something over and not in the, you're not collaborating in the same place at the same time with them, and then a month or a few weeks later, this thing pops back.
It's a black box that comes back.
Yeah, and it's been quite an astounding process for me.
And because so for those, that's basically the Sufuse project, where you had I forget let me see how many tracks. I guess 6 or so tracks, where you had different different vocalists. I guess you came up with, I guess, maybe the bass or the kind of the skeleton structure of the song, and then you had these talented vocalists like Liz Harris and I forget who else was on there, but it's a really cool album, and where they did all the vocals, and well, I guess they sung the vocals, but obviously you wrote the lyrics.
It's split half and half. So one side has vocals or lyrics that I wrote, and the other, they just took it and ran with the music and put their own vocal sounds to it. So, again, it's an interesting way of working. There's no rehearsal as such. There's no real getting to know. There's no, it's a strange but kind of enriching process.
Okay. So let's see. I wanted to ask you, and we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but that's fine. I think, and I might just move some things around, but that's fine. But I think I wanted to ask you about your I guess I won't call it your comeback album, but your RMHQ, your collection of your 4 CDs. Well, 4 CDs in my case, but your Tropic of Anodyne, your Dark Motif Dancehall, Bender, and Transient Global, and Nizia. So how did that come to be? Because that's a lot of material to release all at once. Was that just stuff you just accumulated, then you just kind of replayed, and you just played and went to the studio and did that, or how did that come to be?
No, that all happened pretty much in parallel. So yeah, it's not unlike the process that I've used over a long period of time. So I was talking about Scenes from the South Island and Temple 4 and how they were recorded at the same time. So under roughly the same conditions, but they kind of sorted themselves into containers, without me without designing them containers in advance. So I didn't know I was going to do 4 albums, but I knew once I started recording that it would be something like, I've got some pieces that will have vocals, and I'll sing on them. So I guess that's probably an album's worth somewhere, and maybe I'll have another one of instrumentals. And I just kept adding and adding tracks here and there, and it seemed to. At a certain point, I worked out, well, yeah, there's more than 2 albums here. But I'm not working on them as individual projects that kind of half form themselves by the time I realized. And then there was a little bit of moving things around. But I guess the answer to your question is that it all came in pretty much one big rush of busy work. But I think, like with Scenes from the South Island and Temple 4, I also did a lot of those singles. They were done at exactly the same time. So you could say there's 3 albums at once, or 3 album words. at once, and this is just another, episode in that process.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you the because especially you kind of in some, I guess some people, they kind of see especially with RM with your the RMHQ releases, as well as a lot of I guess, and it seems especially reading some of your old articles from some of these old magazines, or because it seems, especially like I think I've read some of your Wire interviews where they're talking about genres and stuff like that, where they're calling you like the post rock, things like that, and some people are like throwing out all these other genres when they come to your music. What's your, as a musician, and I'm kind of interested because I'm sure different musicians have different thoughts on it. What's your thoughts on how people, I guess, genreize your music and things, and with regards to that? Or is it just all hot air and you're kind of like, okay, this is my music and I'm just going to make how I want it?
No, I don't think it's hot air, because I don't regard those kinds of labels they're not dismissive. I mean, people are, maybe they're grabbing the nearest thing they can grab sometimes. They go, oh, well, that's ambient guitar or post rock or something, and experimental lo-fi, whatever. I don't reject those things, but they're not in my head when I'm making the music. So it's like, oh, well, I'm going to make an ambient album this time, or let's see what post rock references can I have. These things are not things that they're about what's not there as much. It's about what they're avoiding, I think.
Okay.
The patterns or the traps or pitfalls, I think, that you can fall into, like especially a guitarist. It's, I know, well, most of the people I know who play guitar can play guitar better than me, and the ones I like can also do different things with guitar. Even though if you said to them, could you play in a more traditional way, or copy that riff or something like that, or show how good your technique is, they could do that. I'm much more primitive in my abilities, but there are so many pitfalls and traps with technique. Like, once you've mastered a technique that I see, I've seen a lot of people who, they can do all these wonderful things with their hands and their fingers, but they can only reproduce what someone else has already done. It's hard for them to do anything new. They're not really looking at the instrument and going, well, this instrument is way more sophisticated than me in terms of its engineering and its capabilities, and there are all these gadgets that I can add on, and pedals and effects and amplifiers. But I'm going to try to make something new. I'm always looking for some kind of new edge to things. So for me, maybe using a drone as a basis for that is the way that I can, set that thing going, and then try and find something on the edge of that. And sometimes that does sound quite ambient, and it does sound new agey, up to a certain point. And other times it sounds like I'm just borrowing riffs from here and there, and running them together, or playing with an EBO that anybody else could be doing. So I suppose I don't have a sound that's so easy to pigeonhole. But I don't resent people attempting to describe it. And some people are better at doing it than I'm at doing it myself. So,
I could say the same thing. I'm not good at but speaking of, go ahead.
I think the fact that it's like music criticism and rock, so-called rock journalism. I relied on that very heavily when I was younger, relying on what someone else was hearing that I wasn't going to hear for quite a long time, because it would take so long to get over to where I was. There was no radio, no internet that sort of sent things through as quickly as was available, say in the US or in Europe or the UK. So I really had to trust the mind and the interpretation and the aesthetics of someone who was wielding a pen and was not a musician. And I think that still holds. That is and the thing that you have in common is that you're a fan of. So you've got to love, love music in some kind of way. And I think that's why I don't object to people spending any time trying to describe my music or saying why they don't like it. The fact that they've actually tried to listen to it and it's something they relate to, or they can't see what all the fuss is about, means they've at least taken the time to listen to it, probably on someone else's recommendation. And that reminds me of what I was like and what I'm still like as a listener to music. I still, I can't listen to everything.
Yeah.
And I'm often more disconnected from the musical world than a lot of other people are, my peers. So I take that stuff quite seriously, that people are fishing about for a word or a label. At least they're doing that. At least they're bothering. And they're not too cool or too hip to even think about it.
Okay. I know we've gone double what our original time was supposed to be, but I'm gonna try to ask a few more questions because I know you're probably, I don't want to waste your whole Saturday afternoon over there talking to me. But one of the things I've not necessarily related to your music. You talked about how it seemed I guess it was around 1994 that you basically made a huge loop around the United States, starting at San Francisco, where I assume that's where you kind of flew in from New Zealand, and then
Yep.
you drove, and I assume that's where you met up for Drunken Fish Records, and then you went through basically the South Loop all the way up to through Route 66, through Rolla up to Chicago for I get and then made the loop back to San Francisco. I guess as someone who did that, what did you think? Was it worth taking the trip?
Yeah. So the itinerary was partly to do with musical connections and people one or two of whom I'd met, say from Chicago, who'd come to New Zealand. So it was like, well, if you're going to be on the other side of the world, make sure you call in. So there were some people to meet, combined with a very long stored up exposure to beat literature and the idea of driving and traveling as the only way to experience places. So I think obviously I read a whole lot of beat literature, and also the old guide to Route 66, and a book by this man called William Least Heat Moon, who wrote a book called Blue Highways. And the blue in the title is about the back roads. So he deliberately he looked at maps. This was in the days of having to look at big sheets of paper, and worked out travel route to was kind of like an ethnographic study where he just wanted to stop in places that he wouldn't have stopped otherwise and meet up with people who, some of whom warmed to him and some who didn't. He's partly Indigenous American, hence the name. And he had a bad kind of, it was a spiritual breakdown reconstruction process. And he had a van that he called ghost dancing, which he converted to something he could sleep in. And he took that northern arc from, I think he went from New York over to Washington. And so I stitched some of that together into the road trip to try and do a circuit. And of course, there was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Persig's book. Yeah. So it's a real cliche. I mean, I'm old enough now to not to be embarrassed by it, but adding together On the Road and a couple of books by men having a midlife crisis is probably not the best formula for a road trip. But in terms of, in answer to your basic question, it really worked well. It was a good punch. And would I recommend someone doing it now? I'd still recommend that kind of experience. And one of the weirdest things was going through, I don't know that it happened in rural Missouri, but it certainly happened in places like Oklahoma, where you'd turn up in a town that hadn't been on the main road for decades, and people would be, couldn't resist talking to you because they couldn't understand how anybody had found themselves that far out of the way on purpose.
Yeah.
You're not lost? No, I'm not lost. I'm following the route that I planned out. And they go, well, gee, no one ever does that.
Yeah.
And that's where you really do meet people on a much better footing. Because you're curious and they're curious. And I think that's the best it can be.
Well, because the reason why I asked, is because this was a couple years ago. I drove from about where Rolla was at. Rolla staying where it is. I drove from Rolla, and I took the southern kind of through I-44, which was, I guess, Route 66, and I drove all by myself through there through New Mexico, Arizona to California. And me and my infinite wisdom as I think a junior or so in college, I was like, oh, I'm not going to pay. I'm going to skip the toll roads. Right. So I went through these dingy towns and like Oklahoma. I think we had to go through Kansas first, and then I basically went south through Oklahoma to Texas. And these are like the most rockiest roads ever. And these would be populations of probably less than 500 or so. And the only things you would see were windmills. And it was an experience because, but whenever I went, I was visiting my girlfriend at the time, and still is my girlfriend. But whenever I drove back, I learned my lesson. I drove through the tolls, but it was fun doing that, and just seeing the landscapes. And I mean, some spots are a little bit similar to Missouri, but other spots, like how the Rockies are looking like, and having to drive like, I don't know, like a 40-degree grading of a hill, you don't see that much often, and I thought it was really neat. But
I also liked the feel of an old road. So finding bits of Route 66 where it would run out, like there'd be maybe 2 miles of the road still left, and the only thing you could do was drive up and down, like in one direction, and then drive back in the other direction. But it was still that old, it was that road, and I felt, you could put everything else aside, all the other stuff going on around you in the world, all the traffic going on the interstates, but also the rest of the world in a larger sense, or the baggage you have in your own mind, things that you might have to return to, and you can just say, nope, here I am in the middle of nowhere on a dead road that no one uses except someone else like me who is fool enough to try and trace this route on a map, and find that it's almost impossible to do without doubling back and getting lost.
I definitely did that.
And help is just half a mile away, but it's not the help that you want.
Okay. Well, I think that's I guess my one last question, we kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. I guess what are your future plans? You mentioned things with reissues and things like that, and I should remember this, but you're releasing new material relatively soon. But do you want to just, I guess, put in your just talk about what you're doing in the near future, and I guess what are you excited to do in the world of music?
Okay, so in terms of material, there's at least one album good to go, which has the title After Nietzsche. So if you're a fan of dark, philosophy, there's an album for you, which is a collaboration with Emma Johnston, who did one of the tracks on RMHQ, the Weathering Mortality track with The Voice.
Okay.
So we've done an album together, and we call that After Nietzsche. I think that's coming out through a European label in Brussels.
Oh, that was the one? Sorry, that was the one where you had the Leonard Cohen cover, right? Or is
That's a different Belgian.
Okay. Sorry.
Outlet. Yep. So yeah, that was. But Emma's on that track in the background, and on the flip side is a collaboration with Jessica Moss, the Canadian violinist, who's really great. I collaborated with her at a festival in Holland last year, no, the year before. But this is a different album, but it's from Belgium. There's another album / double album of just purely solo instrumental stuff, which I think will be probably next year. Maybe there's too much going on this year, but essentially brand new material, solo instrumental. Quite cinematic. I think it should, feel cinematic to me. So I hope it has that effect on other people. Scenes from the South Island, working towards a reissue of that this year with some extra material on it, because in its original form, it's too much for one vinyl album. You can tell that from the copy you've got, where everything's compressed together and almost unlistenable. So spreading that out onto 2 albums with some new material, where I had to really go back and try and get back into that space and record some new material that was of a place in the South Island. So that's been interesting. I think it works okay. There's the Dada Ma vinyl reissue, which is probably going to happen sometime this year. Temple 4, at some point. I've recorded some new material for that as well, because it's got the same dilemma, that it's too long for a single vinyl album and too short for a double vinyl album. But I think I've got the pieces together for that. And I've probably forgotten something else.
Well, you can leave the rest for a surprise, because it looks like you've been very busy.
Yeah.
So
I'm still working. Oh yeah, there's I don't want to drop names too much, but Mary Lattimore, the harpist, working with her on some things at the moment.
Okay.
Really interesting.
Well, it seems like you got a lot coming out, so a lot of people have a lot of opportunities to check you out. So I'm excited. So with that, I guess we'll go ahead and end the interview. Again, thanks, Roy, for we I guess we had issue for enduring whatever dogs were barking and things like that, and it was a great interview. I really enjoyed the time we spent talking.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate you doing your homework and asking me, thoughtful questions. Really helps.
Well, we all try. So, okay, I'm gonna stop the broadcast now. So hopefully
Okay.
I don't mess it up.